Hi, my name's Nick Broughton and I'm a Randomfish. If you're a Randomfish too, hit that subscribe button and we'll be Randomfishes together, shall we? Now, on my last video I talked about Basil Brush because, quite frankly, talking about American shows all the time didn't feel very, well, good, I guess. Mainly because I never really watched a lot of them growing up as a kid, and honestly, how I feel about shows now to how I felt about them as a child is actually always a lot of fun to look at. So I was going through some old shows that I used to watch, or at least looking through the old Wikipedia entries of them, and I came across one that I actually still remember pretty vividly because it only ended about 4 years ago now. And that show is Young Dracula. Young Dracula started in 2006 and continued on to 2014 with only 5 seasons. The most interesting bit about this show is that it has this really divisive feel across the first and second season and then into the remaining 3. And it's really interesting to sort of see it because you can really tell where the directors and the producers all changed, and you can almost tell that they wanted a different tone for the show, but they still had to go with some of the goofier elements, but they were able to wean them down to almost the bare minimum, which was kind of cool to see. Young Dracula starred Keith Lee Castle as Count Dracula and Garen Howell, if I'm mispronouncing the name, I do apologise, as Vlad. Now, the story is essentially that Count Dracula and his 2 children and their butler had to leave Transylvania to move to Stokely in Wales. Yes, to anyone who's in Wales and watching these videos, congratulations! I'm talking about Wales. That was a bit forced. But the idea is that they moved to Stokely because of the mobs that chased them out of Transylvania. And they, obviously, vampires are feared by most, and of course in Transylvania, Count Dracula, where he lives, he would be subject to a lot of hatred from the various villagers. Because, let's face it, if anyone tries to eat members of your family, you're gonna start hunting them. It's just fact, not fiction. In the first and second season, it really had a much more comedic and more of a childlikeness to the show, I guess. The main reason for this being is that Vlad, when we first meet him, is 12, I think? Possibly? I'm not entirely sure. But he is of an older... He is... a fairly young... He's a young kid, but he's not too young. His older sister, Ingrid, is a complete and total insane person. And his father, Count Dracula, is, of course... Well, he's Count Dracula. I mean, you can create all the characteristics you want for him. But actually, he's not only... he attempts to be scary and terrifying, but because it's a kids' show, people sort of look past it, or they're too dumb or too ignorant to sort of realise the danger that they're in, which is lovely to see. The story goes that they moved to Stokely, Wales, because they were chased down Transylvania, and Vlad wants nothing more than to be a normal child. He wants to be a normal kid, he wants to become a normal man. He doesn't want to be a vampire like his father. Which is also, so ironically, exactly what his father wants for him. Wap, wap, wap. Yeah, it's so sad. Yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of fun to watch. So, Count Dracula wants Vlad to become a vampire because he wants Vlad to embrace his vampirisms, because obviously Vlad is going to take over the family name once the Count dies, or if the Count just decides to stop being, you know, the main Count Dracula. It's kind of fun with the vampire lore in this because it's filled with this thing of you can be born into a vampire family. There are more families than just the Draculas running around. So you do actually see other vampires have children, so it's not unheard of. It's not like the Count is a freak of nature in that regard. But it seemed to be this idea that only a boy can succeed the father. The Count hates the idea of a woman becoming the next Count Dracula. You know, hence why Ingrid is a character in and of herself, mainly so she can call the Count out on his BS, And so he can basically sit there and say, "You're not being the new Count Dracula, go away and make me some tea." To which he gives him the middle finger. Not literally, obviously, it's a children's show, but figuratively, in her mind, a lot. But the first and second season is full of a lot more comedy because obviously Vlad is attempting to be a normal boy. And you can almost tell the comedy because you have the Count resplendent in black, you know, and red, and the long black hair, and the very impressive demeanour, and just his voice is so very smooth and lovely. And Keithley Castle is a treasure to watch. He really is. And Ingrid is very much the same. Black, red, long flowing black hair. Very much the seductiveness of the vampire that's shown, and everything else. And she clearly loves what she does. Like, not only is she older than Vlad, so she doesn't understand why the Count won't choose her to be the next heir, but in all logical sense, Ingrid is the better choice to be the next vampire, to be the next Count Dracula, because she loves being a vampire. She loves it. She embraces it 100% with no issue. And it's lovely to see. And Vlad meets these two normal humans, these two mortals, if you will, called Robin and his sister Chloe. Now, they are basically the neighbours to the Draculas. Despite the fact the Draculas live in a gigantic castle, how they found a decent spooky castle in Stokely is kind of interesting to find, but hey, we live, we learn. But their neighbours are this very normal family, and apart from Robin, who, like Ingrid, is obsessed with vampires, to the point where he wants to become Vlad's best friend because of this concept. Because of the desire he has to be a vampire, it overrides all other forms of common sense. And that's brilliant to see. It really is. There's even a point where they try to make us convinced that there's a chance that Robin is the son of Dracula, and not Vlad, who would go off and live with Chloe and their family and all that. And it would be the most perfect setup if only it were true, and it's not. And you can tell that very early on. There are some plot lines that they tried in the first season that just seemed a bit too obvious that they weren't going to work. Just because of when you watch the show, it's very, very clear that it's not designed, you know, they weren't designed to work. Like, this kid is clearly of the doomed persuasion. Also, a little bit of a shout out. I understand this show took place in 2006. I was 16 when it first came out. I probably have no business watching it at 16. But I'll be honest, there wasn't a lot of good TV on, and frankly, the show seemed far too hilarious to not really care. And I got more into it when it came back, actually, less so afterwards, which is really kind of interesting. The second season, because the first season is very much that. It's slapstick, it's humour, it's hiding, it's funny expressions by Keithley Castle. Oh, and I almost forgot. There's a vampire hunter. Yeah, strange I left him out, isn't it? This is because he and his son Jonathan, Eric and his son Jonathan, are the last members of the Van Helsing family. And Eric very much wants this to continue. He wants Jonathan to be a vampire hunter just like he is. And he wants to hunt and kill the Count. Because he figures out pretty quickly that there are vampires living in the area. And the show, all their shtick during the show, is them trying to break into the castle or try to kill the Count in some other way and everything else. And it's all just very entertaining and very, very weird to sort of see. And I'll be honest, again, they were comedic. I never really saw them as a threat. Because I almost felt like the only one out of the two of them that could have shown some kind of competence in this concept was Jonathan. But ironically, we do get a decent start to this in the second season, because at the end of the first season, Jonathan realizes that his dad was telling the truth and that they are vampires. So in the second season, it gets a little bit darker, which is very cool to see. It still keeps the light and comedic tone, but the darker elements become much more forward-fronting, I guess. Jonathan obviously starts willingly aiding his father in taking down the Dracula family. And Vlad learns some more disturbing things about what happens when you become a full vampire, because at this point in his life, he's still a child, he's still growing up, you haven't quite developed all of your vampiric powers, I guess. It's sort of, they develop early on. Like I said, the lore is very cool in this. And at one point, when you reach 16, you are allowed, you have to, as it were, step into a mirror, or at least go up to a mirror, and you have to join with your quote-unquote evil self to become a truly full vampire, with the fangs and everything else. And it's all lovely jubbly. And actually, I have to say, one of the best bits about this, vampirism in culture, in the mythology that's been raised around it, and everything else that's been raised around it, there's so much metaphor you could use with this, especially in today's society. You know, for a vampire, craving blood is like craving a drink at the end of the day, or craving drugs, you know, when you're down off that high. And that's what it's focusing on, not the bad thing, the so-called bad things that you need to stay away from because you might get addicted to them. Vampirism is the addiction itself. It's a very pure metaphor in the form of addiction, which is really cool. And from that same perspective, you have that with the mirror, the blood mirror. You have your addiction step through, or you step through to meet your addiction, and you have to merge with it as an attempt at controlling it, as an attempt to get ahead of it. And you have to learn how to focus these things very much. And it's really quite interesting, because for a kid's show, it's quite sophisticated with that concept. Obviously these things are never fully out, well spelt and everything else. Like, you don't see it appear in subtitles on the show, you know, watch out, this is a metaphor for drugs. You know, none of that shit. But it is very clever, and it is very cool. And the end of the second season is essentially Vlad and the Count and Ingrid hosting a whole bunch of vampires, due to the fact that someone who used to be the head of the Vampire Council unfortunately died through various previous episodes. Vlad is obviously more resigned to his fate of being a vampire than ever before, but the ghost of the old vampire who died keeps appearing to him and telling him about this prophecy of the Chosen One, a vampire that will lead all vampires in a great new world, and it will give them something to do and everything else, and it will be wonderful and lovely and yay! And the way to figure this out is to put on a crown of bones that was left behind after he died. I.e., and also, ironically, they have to put on the crown to decide who's going to be the next leader of the council. So, it all comes to a crux when the vampire hunters all come in and attempt to destroy all the vampires. There's a massive fight breaking out between all of them. Various side characters who I haven't mentioned because I'm sorry, I'm not really that attached to them. I'm sorry, I'm just not. They all get axed off or whatever, and Vlad puts on the crown in this last-ditch attempt to save his family, who are imprisoned in this gigantic sun cage, which is, again, the show does wonders. The vampire hunters have developed this technology that they throw it at the vampires, and it creates a cage of beams of light. And if they try to go through the bars, they turn to dust, because sunlight kills vampires. But it can't just kill them just by entrapping them. It entraps them, but it's only when they try to pass through it that it kills them. I think that's genius. I think that's absolutely amazing. In the second season finale, Vlad puts on the crown, and lightning shoots out of him. It's really weird effects, and he's raised up above all of them, and he erases a whole bunch of memories, and he and he tells all the vampires to basically get lost, and he tries to say basically why do humans and vampires constantly have to fight? Why can't they live in peace? And after he makes this speech, he teleports them all outside, their memories are all gone, blah blah blah. and he faints. He collapses. And Ingrid is the only one who wasn't trapped in the cage. And she takes up her father's, like the sphere and the staff that the Queen has when she gets coronated. She basically picks up stuff that looks like that, and she sits on the throne of Dracula, and she turns back to her father imprisoned in the light cage, and says that she is now the Countess Dracula, and that she will now rule over Stokely and make their streets run red with blood. And that was the finale. You can imagine how pumped I was for Season 3. When did Season 3 come? Not 3 years later! 3 years bloody later? Oh my god! I had to wait for 3 years to find out what happened. And in the opening of the 3rd season, it's like it never fucking happened. They explain it all away as just really weird exposition. They've moved again, because obviously of the fight that happened and blah 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 and everything else, and it's all just... It got a bit too messy to stay in Stokely, so they buggered off somewhere else. They went off to a school, which the Count owns, and Vlad now goes to and everything else. As does Ingrid. Who Ingrid will go to anyway. She's still in Stokely, or she's running around trying not to get killed by vampire hunters anyway. And from the 3rd to the 5th season, it's all a lot cooler. There's a lot more conspiracy theories. There's a lot more character development. You actually see Vlad lose his shit quite a few times. It's really cool. You see his powers a lot more. He's grown up a lot in the 3 years. And he is developed more as a vampire. He has the speed down. He can do the fire thing that happens, because sometimes vampires can do the fire thing out of their hands and throw it towards people. It feels very charmed, but we live, we learn. And he's developed all these really cool powers and everything else, and it's really fun to watch. There's a brilliant bit where, after Ingrid's being hunted by the vampire hunters, the vampire hunters get taken out by Vlad, who just picks them up in the van and just screams, "Leave my family alone," drops the van and buggers off. And the vampire hunters obviously can't do anything. And Ingrid is sick, essentially, trying to get away from the vampire hunters. Don't know what she's had, but she's got something. And she tells Vlad that she can take care of herself. And you see this bit where she tries to look intimidating with the fangs and the glowing red eyes. And she says, "I'm not afraid to use them." And Vlad just steps forward and just says, "You'll lose." And as he says that, his voice gets distorted. Fire appears around them in a circle. His eyes go black into full contact mode. It's really quite cool to see. It's not... I can't do it justice, obviously. You're going to have to watch the episode to find this out. But it's so cool to watch. And you get the invention of more side characters. Obviously, the characters that you meet in the first and second season are gone. Robin and Chloe are no longer there. But the Van Helsings do come back, and that's much later on. And in the 3rd season, we get the introduction of Bertrand. Another vampire who's attempted to tutor Vlad in the ways of becoming a vampire. You get the introduction of Erin, a human girl who wants to kill Ingrid because she turned her brother into a vampire. Oh my god, yes! More plots like that, that'd be brilliant. And I'm not going to reveal all the plot lines for all the seasons, but let's just say throughout the 3rd season, that's what that is. There's a girl trying to kill Ingrid because of the stuff that happened to her brother, and Vlad attempting to take his place as the new leader of the vampires after he enters the Blood Mirror at some point during the season. We then get, in the 4th season, we get the introduction of another vampire called Malik, and this disembodied being that we never find out the identity of until the very final 2 episodes, which is so messed up and yet so cool to see. And then in the 5th season, it's something to do with a seed of evil. I feel like that's a Doctor Who storyline, but whatever. In fact, it is. Well, the title is anyway, The Seeds of Doom, or The Seeds of Evil, something like that. But over the course of the seasons, all these characters, they all do these amazing things. The plot lines get weirder and weirder. The stories are cooler and cooler. And Vlad, throughout the whole thing, remains positive. He wants to try and bring about peace between vampires and humans. And he tries so many times over the course of the show. And he nearly succeeds, which is really frustrating. And the actors are all phenomenal. Keith Lee Castle, I cannot praise him enough. I really can't. The man is a genius. The way he is in the show, despite the fact that he knows it's a kid's show, he's still putting 110% into it. And there are a lot of shows that were meant for kids that didn't try very hard. Especially in the early 2000s, because I'm sorry, but for a lot of us kids, we weren't watching it for the adults. We were watching it for the kids, and watching it to see how see about good child actors. The guy playing Vlad, he got so much better in the 3rd to 5th seasons. He really did. His acting soared so much, and just all of this stuff. Ingrid is fantastic throughout the whole thing. She's a brilliant character who goes through this very cool arc of having to live with the fact that she is not going to be the next Count Dracula, that she's not going to be the chosen one, that she has to settle for the little victories in the places that she can, and she has to try and earn respect a lot through the vampire community. And again, she succeeds in it. She succeeds in getting respect. And that's so good to see her do. That's so good to actually have that happen for her. Like I said, a bunch of side characters. I'm not going to mention them all because I'll be here forever. I recommend that you go and watch all of Young Dracula. You can find it on YouTube, or look for it on CBBC iPlayer, because it might all still be there. I don't know. Or if you're in a place where you can, buy the DVDs. You will not regret it. It is fantastic. It is so well done. Honestly, I cannot speak highly enough of this show, and I loved it. I loved every second of it. And yeah, watch Young Dracula, my friends, because frankly, the show is genius. Randomfish out.